Hi everyone, welcome in. Hi everyone, thank you for joining me on this Wednesday evening, spending around 45 minutes to an hour of your time to discuss and learn about personal statements. So this will be recorded, the person who has just asked that, and the recording link will be sent out to you afterwards so that you can rewatch it. I'll be going through quite a few different things in the course of this next hour or so. I will also be getting around to your questions, and I'll go through as many as possible, depending on how many there are. So please feel free to use the Q&A function, which is available if you're not familiar with Zoom. I think most of you probably are in Zoom. So if you go to the options on your Zoom panel, it might be under More. You go to Q&A, you'll be able to ask your questions there, either anonymously or not anonymously. But this will be recorded. Cool. So I'm going to get started. Um, so my name is Theo. I've got a few different degrees. The first degree was from Cambridge. I studied a degree called Human, Social, and Political Sciences. I then went on to do an arts degree at Guildhall and then a neuroscience and psychology degree at Birkbeck. I've worked in universities, I've worked in higher education research, but most importantly for this, I've also seen many, many thousands of personal statements, and I've advised students within my role at Duke's Education for the best part of 10 years now. If you can't hear me for any reason, then please put that into the chat and I can address that. But hopefully any audio issues are related to your individual systems, not mine. I've not seen anything yet, but please let me know if there are. So I am presenting to you from a company called Oxbridge Applications. We're part of Duke's Education, which is a big family of schools and higher education consultancies. We've been running now for over 25 years. We're on our 27th year. And we work with a lot of the leading schools across the UK and beyond. We do lots of in-house support. We do teacher training on making competitive applications for top UK universities. And each year we work with thousands of individual students as well. So if you're interested in getting a little bit of extra support over the summer, perhaps with your personal statement or with your admissions test preparation, or else with your interview preparation, or maybe you're planning to apply next year, then please go ahead and get in touch with us. Excellent. So let's get round to it today. First off, I want to cover what top universities are actually looking for. This phrase, top universities, is a little bit loaded, I understand. I don't take it for granted at all that Oxford and Cambridge are automatically the top universities. They're very selective academically. So it's probably more helpful to think of this presentation as being focused on those universities which are highly academically selective and are more focused on research as opposed to perhaps teaching. They want students who are academically interested in the course that they're looking to study. So I'll be going into detail about what those universities are looking for. We'll look at what they're saying and some of my experience too. Then in the second part of this, I'm going to give you 3 tips that I think benefit strong applicants in taking a good personal statement to a great personal statement. Lots of candidates produce decent personal statements, but how do you really stand out in that pile? And thirdly, there are a few remaining bits and pieces that often people want to ask. So I'll take care of a few of those questions. I'll also cover a little bit on the Cambridge specific statement, which, if you didn't know, is an additional statement that's optional for Cambridge applicants to fill out about a week after the UCAS deadline of the 15th of October. Then I'll have time to take your questions. So, what do top universities want? A quick reminder, what are the questions for the UCAS personal statement? So as you have to fill out your UCAS statement, you may have already, you may be familiar with these, you may have looked at this, you may not have registered yet. The questions are threefold. Why do you want to study this course or subject? So focus in on your motivation for the course. Secondly, how have your qualifications and studies prepared you for it? So why are you ready to study this particular course? And thirdly, what have you done beyond your studies and why have those experiences been useful to you? So what else have prepared you? So these three questions are designed to fit the thousands and thousands of different types of courses available through UCAS, and there's many different types. Some of them are more vocational, some of them are more academically focused. So really, these questions are intended to be a one-size-fits-all best three questions to fit all these different instances. They're not necessarily the questions that each individual institution might ask, would they have free rein over designing UCAS? Although, of course, UCAS designed these questions in collaboration with lots of different universities. So my advice to you in terms of these questions is not to be super obedient to them, because it will probably turn out that the emphasis that different universities are looking for will be slightly variant on the focus of these three questions. So always check the personal statement guidance and the requirements sought after of the individual universities you're looking at applying to. The format is 4,000 characters, including spaces, which is about a page and a little bit of A4 size 12. The stipulation is that you use 350 characters, including spaces, minimum for each of those questions. So that's under 10% of your total allowance. But this is one personal statement and it's read as a whole. Universities are not chopping the statement into three and comparing your answer 3 with another candidate's answer 3 and so on and so forth. They will be looking at your statement as a whole and reading it, hopefully, from top to bottom. So the implication is, please don't agonize over what to put where, both in terms of which materials should fit in which question, but also in terms of people thinking they need to balance the character length of each question in order for it to look symmetrical or neat. Tutors do not care about that sort of thing. It really doesn't matter. They're reading the whole statement as one document. And so please don't worry if you're stuck between putting a sentence in section 2 or section 3, or if your section 1 or 2 or 3 looks particularly short. As long as the right material is going somewhere in those 3 sections, you'll be fine. So let's look at what Oxford and Cambridge are saying, and then we'll look at a couple of other competitive universities as well. A little extract of their personal statement advice. Tutors want to see that you are truly committed to the subject, but it is not enough just to say you have a passion for it. Show how deeply you have engaged above and beyond what you've studied at school. Reeling off a list of books is not helpful. Explaining how 1 or 2 changed your understanding is what impresses. The things to pick out here are show, don't tell. Lots of personal statements speak a lot about passion and synonyms that might stand for passion. Lots of personal statements also reel off a list of books. So they come across as a list of achievements or readings. However, what they're looking for is a demonstrated passion through showing depth of engagement, rather than having obediently gone through a list of different books and articles and other kinds of supercurriculars. We'll go on to talk about this in more depth. This is what Oxford wants to see. Cambridge, we use personal statements to identify applicants with the most academic potential. We read your statement in full and don't give it a formal score. It's only one part of your application, and we do not expect it to be aimed at Cambridge alone. The reassuring thing to take from this is that they don't give it a formal score, but they do give your admissions tests a formal score. And in some senses, they give your UCAS form, i.e. your GCSE scores, your predicted scores, a kind of score. So in the grand scheme of things, your personal statement is used, it's important. But if you've got an admissions test to prepare for, please spend longer preparing for your admissions test than you're spending writing your personal statement, because it's more impactful in your application. UCL, quite similar messaging. 75 to 80% of the statement must be about the subject. Select only your best examples, reflect on your experiences, stay focused and relevant, and avoid cliches and bland, vague statements. And LSE, at least 80% should emphasize your interest in the program with evidence of critical engagement with the subject and your supercurricular activity. So all of these universities are saying roughly the same thing. They're in the same sort of realm of or type of university, highly selective Russell Group universities, academically focused, and they want to see 80% or more of your material in your personal statement to be about the subject you're applying for, and ideally things that you've done which stretch beyond your syllabus at school. This same statement goes to all 5 of your choices. It's an obvious thing to say, but it's worth thinking about the implications briefly. This means the course choices you're making should share sufficient ground. I applied to a unique course at Cambridge, which meant that I applied for slightly different courses elsewhere. And lots of people do the same thing, and there's ways to make that work. But you must make sure that you're applying to courses that share enough themes, that share enough academic ground for you to write a sufficiently convincing document to all of them, at least all of them that you're passionate about attending. The implication of that, so the next step is that before you consolidate your choices, you need to make sure you've researched them carefully so that actually the content that you're interested in might be covered by the courses that you're applying to. I'd want to note one exception while we're on this page. So Durham University offer the chance for you to do a substitute personal statement, but they are, to my knowledge, the only university that allow you to do that. So if you'd like to completely substitute or replace your personal statement to Durham, you can do that. Usually universities will not allow you to do that or submit a secondary personal statement. For those of you holding your hands up, just because of the size of the group of people watching at the moment, please put your questions into the Q&A and I will try to get around to them towards the end of this. What they need to know. So the basic questions admissions tutors are going to ask about your personal statement are, why are you applying for this course? And that's your motivation. So that ties in with question 1 of the new structure of the UCAS personal statement. This needs to be focused on academics, on i.e. the course content that you're going to be learning. Why you are passionate for zoology or Portuguese literature or whatever it might be in your course that you want to study. Unless your course is very vocational, like medicine, they want to see your academic passion chiefly, not necessarily what you might go on to do with a degree in 5, 10, 15 years' time. Maybe you will go on to be a banker after having studied economics, for example. But what they want to know, because they're academics and they're interested in your academic performance, is what interests you about economics. Secondly, what's your evidence? So this refers to supercurriculars. I'll define that in a moment. But they need to know proof. It's talk is cheap. You must provide them with some evidence that you are interested in whatever subject you're applying to. And thirdly, do you know what you're getting yourself into? That can be shown by the type of evidence you are sharing with them. So are the readings and the lectures that you're looking at relevant to the type of subject you're applying to and the level at which you're looking to study it? But really what this is hinting at is, are the pieces of evidence you're using relevant, but are they also showing that you know the level of material you're going to be looking at. For example, if you're applying for a science subject, then I would suggest having at least a reference or two in there which shows you've looked at some kind of scientific research or you're aware of how academics might approach a scientific question, rather than sticking to the very superficial or introductory books that someone who's just approaching the subject might be looking at. If your course is directly vocational, so medicine, like I've already mentioned, you must find balance. But the cases of those types of courses is honestly quite small, the number of cases. So medicine and clinical courses and courses with a clear vocational progression to them, you should find balance in discussing your interest in the career to some extent, but still focusing on the degree itself. So what are they looking for? Undergraduate potential. How strong are you going to be as an undergraduate student on the course that you've applied to? Are you potentially going to be getting a first-class degree result at the end of this course? In order to show that, I would suggest keeping your personal statement to 80% plus supercurricular material. That means material that relates to the course you're applying to that has gone beyond your school syllabus. So you might mention one or two of your topics in school that you've been interested in, but then you must show how you've gone beyond that because they were a springboard to something else, or you wanted to search for more complexity or more depth in those topics. Followed independently. University work is independent. You need to have a high level of self-motivation. And so if your personal statement is full of phrases such as, my teacher handed me this next book to look at, and then I was told to read this, and so I did, they're not going to feel that you're particularly independent. Rather, they want to see you in the driving seat. I went out of my way to find this new resource about this topic. I discovered in the bibliography, it mentioned that they'd already done this research 10 years ago. And so I looked at that original paper and I compared it to this one. Independent work and supercurricular material. And my advice for what sort of supercurricular material to include is, generally speaking, keep it relevant. So highly relevant to the course you're applying to. You might have lots of different academic interests, but the course you're applying to won't necessarily facilitate those to the extent that you think. If you're applying to a physics course, you may not be able to study much biology, for example. So keep your examples relevant to the course and relatively recent. There's lots of people that apply with introductory paragraphs to their statement, saying something along the lines of, when I was 4 years old, I used to break toy cars apart and put them back together. Then when I was 6 years old, at school, I used to, etc., etc. You have a very limited number of characters. So my advice is, because they're looking to see you know what you're getting yourself in for, so you know the level of study you need to be doing, keep your examples relevant and recent, unless you think there's something extremely important. Great. So, where some statements fail. So these are common issues with personal statements that I would try and avoid. So I'm telling you now so that you can avoid them. Firstly, they stay on the syllabus. The second question in the UCAS personal statement structure talks about your qualifications and studies. That's a little bit misleading to some people because it might suggest that universities want to hear more about what you're studying at school, your GCSEs, your A-levels, maybe your IB or other qualifications that you're doing. But that's not interesting to highly academic top universities. What they want to see is what you've done beyond that, because compelling undergraduate applicants will have a focus on supercurricular material. If you stay focused on your syllabus, then a lot of that material, they could have inferred by the fact that you're doing those A-levels in the first place. So there's a lot of second sections in personal statements that say, I'm studying maths as my first A-level. This has given me a really rigorous introduction to problem solving and logical thinking, and I've particularly enjoyed the topic of calculus, where I've learned how to do X, Y, Z. That's, by my opinion, a waste of characters, because having seen that you've got maths as one of your A levels elsewhere on your UCAS form, they don't need to hear any more about it. Your teachers will also talk about how good you are in your A levels. So you might, as I mentioned before, use aspects of your A levels as jumping off points, but I would not recommend staying focused on them. Similarly, repeating the obvious. So discussing aspects of your studies that can be found elsewhere, or repeating generic definitions of the subject. It's a common trope or a cliche in the opening of a personal statement to give a definition of the subject. Unless you're saying something really specific, I would suggest not to do that and instead go to something that's more particular to you. So a resource that you found about the subject that was particularly interesting. The people reading your statement don't need to be told what the subject is. They might have studied it for many decades themselves. But more than that, it's a phrase that any other applicant could put in their statement. Are hard to read. Sometimes you have applicants who are very academically talented. Maybe they stay writing their personal statement for a long time, agonizing over phrasing, trying to fit more and more into their personal statement. And that could lead to your statement being overly dense, tangled, difficult to read. The other side of this, apart from trying to fit in too much, is by trying to impress with your complex sentence structure or the types of words that you're using. Really good statements should be really easy, relatively easy to read and comprehend, because it might be that they have 30 or 40 seconds to read your personal statement. So make sure that it's readable within that kind of time. Relatedly, they try to cram in too many different things. One of the tips I'm going to tell you is how to counter this, which is essentially going a little bit more into depth, into fewer topics, rather than listing out every single topic and every interest you have in the subject. Breadth shows them much more than having looked at lots of topics on the surface. Describing rather than engaging. Again, this relates to one of the points that I'm going to, the hints that I'm going to give you next. Lots of candidates will talk about their readings in a way that summarizes the material. So it might be in Thinking Fast and Slow, the author argues that there are two different modes of thinking, mode 1 and mode 2, where mode 2 is more unconscious. This kind of description really only tells me that you're able to look at a description of the book, of any book on Wikipedia, or the back of the book even. It doesn't tell me that you might be an interesting undergraduate student to teach, because you're not showing me anything about your thinking, so your critical analysis. And finally, they contain slips sometimes. And this is particularly for those people that make last minute edits. Often it's that last minute introduction of something that can introduce an error, maybe a spelling mistake or a punctuational mistake. This is not a fatal error. Don't worry if you misspell someone's name or there's an extra full stop where there shouldn't be one, for example. It's not going to damn your application, because the personal statement is one part of your application among many. But academics are pedantic, so please triple check your statement. It can let you down and slightly hamper the impression, particularly if you're applying for a very writing heavy or essay heavy subject. So 3 tips now on how to go from good to great. I've given you a sort of precursor to some of those. So how do you take your statement to the next level? The first thing is to show your thinking. Universities want thinking in personal statements, not passive summaries. So rather than describing, show what your critical thoughts are, at least in some places of your statement. What does this mean? It means you analyze and evaluate. So evaluate meaning weighing up different pieces of evidence and showing where your opinion lies. What do you think about this topic? From what you've read so far, what do you think is the next frontier of research we need to do on this topic? Thinking also comes through in connections. So if you've got lots of different pieces of reading, then showing how those pieces of reading might connect to each other, maybe through a theme or maybe through a methodology or maybe a process. then that can show that you're making active, thoughtful insights into the things that you've been looking at. And the third way of thinking is applications. So this is particularly true of STEM subjects like engineering or physics. If you've read a bit of research, maybe it's not that you could question the mathematics involved in that piece of research because it's probably going to be broadly true, hopefully, if it's been peer reviewed. But you could talk about the applications of it. So where could it be taken to next? What could this method be applied to? Where are the gaps in this research? So what kind of thinking and why? You might have heard of something called Bloom's taxonomy. It's an educational psychologist's ranking of different types of thinking. So at the bottom, you have remembering. Of course, this is hugely important. You've got memory. Then understanding what you've remembered. So comprehending concepts. Being able to apply those concepts to different situations, Bloom thinks is the next rung above. And analyzing those things, being able to break them apart into constituent pieces and put them back together. Evaluating, so making judgments on what those things are, whether you agree or disagree, or whether we should be doing X, Y, Z or shouldn't be doing that. And creating. So there are a few different variations on Bloom's taxonomy, but this is one version that's quite common. And the reason why they're looking for those top level skills of evaluation and creativity is because those kinds of skills are going to get you the top marks at university. So of course you got to do all the other things. They are foundational because they form the bottom of the pyramid. You've got to remember the material, got to be able to apply it and understand it and analyze it. But you get the top marks through being creative, maybe introducing unexpected ideas or links, and showing your own evaluation. Do you agree with these things? Do you not agree, and why? So I'll give you an example of this in practice. Here's an example of a good personal statement. Doing history and English A-levels has taught me content and skills, such as writing and analysis of complicated texts, such as Bulgakov's Master and Margarita, which will be relevant for an essay-heavy degree. My ability in this area is demonstrated by my recent winning of the Peterhouse College History Essay Prize. Great, there's a few really interesting and impressive facts about this person. How do we take that and inject some thinking into it? So, studying history and English has led me to notice a parity between ideas in historiography and literary theory. Pursuing this, I entered and won the Peterhouse essay competition, in which I critiqued Barth's idea of the author as scripter through analysis of the subversion of historical context in Bulgakov's Master and Margarita. Why is this better? Well, first of all, it leads with ideas rather than discussing skills that they've gained in more of a passive way. So rather than things having come to them, they're expressing what they have thought about the texts that they've been looking at. Secondly, there is the mention of their Peterhouse College history essay competition, but it serves their thinking. So they also use it to describe how they have been developing their ideas and their thinking. And they also share the argument that they made as part of that. It also goes into specifics. If you imagine you're an interviewer and this person is coming to you in an Oxford college for their interview for history and English, which out of these two extracts would you be more interested in using as a basis for the interview? Well, there's a lot more immediately there in the great version because it's giving you ideas already. In the first version, so in the good version, I'm interested, but I don't know what angle you were taking with Bulgakov. I'm not sure what kind of interests you have in the relationship between history and English. So there's lots of questions that someone can come up with in an academic interview, which of course all Oxford and Cambridge courses will be doing with that great version. Second tip is to maximize your individuality. For some courses, there might be 100 personal statements for maybe 2 places. That would go for very, very competitive courses. But in most cases, particularly at Oxbridge, in every case, there will be more personal statements and more applicants than there are places. And the majority of those personal statements represent applicants who are academically strong. The average A-level predicted grade for those applying for Oxford and Cambridge is 2 A stars and an A. So already you're among a talented applicant pool. How do you stand out? Well, maximize your individuality is a good idea. So think about the readings that you've done and the topics that you're interested in. What have you read that might be slightly off the main reading lists that universities tend to suggest for applicants? If you've started with a suggested reading list, maybe from Oxford or Cambridge or maybe another university, what have you done that is slightly off kilter from there? Secondly, what about your experiences? What have you done? Maybe it's an activity that you've taken part in that's maybe semi-academic, maybe a lecture that you've gone to, or it could be some current affairs you're interested in, particularly for a social science. It could be something that you have experienced in your day-to-day life that then sparked some kind of academic thought. Those kinds of individual connections to experiences are also more likely to help you to stand out. And thirdly, even if you have interesting individual books and examples to share, you're even more likely to come across as individual if you're able to link those things together. So in the previous tip, I also mentioned being able to make connections between things as being an example of good critical thinking or thinking skills. This also helps to maximize your individuality. So another applicant might have also read the 3 same books that you have, but they're not linking them together in an interesting way that you are. So here's an example of maximizing individuality. Here is a good version. Reading for economics sparked my fascination with economics, and now I follow The Economist each week to understand how markets shape the world. I was especially interested in the 2008 financial crisis and how government intervention can stabilize economies. Studying supply and demand at A-level showed me how relevant economic theory is to everyday life, and I am eager to explore these ideas further at university. So injecting a little bit of individual personality into this. Queuing outside a Peckham bakery that had quietly raised its sourdough by £2, I wondered why prices so often move in jumps rather than sliding, the way a demand curve proposes or promises. Chasing that led me to Blinder's work on how firms actually set prices, and left me suspicious of any model where markets adjust frictionally, as a textbook diagram suggests. That gap is what I want to study. So you might find that second example maybe a little bit cheesy or a little bit trite or something. But it is more interesting and it's more individual. And it also achieves being academic because it references some economic research as part of it. So this links to a real observation rather than the sparked my passion cliche. We're going straight into an example of an experience this person had experienced. It doesn't need to be an experience like this. It could also be a reading. It could be watching a lecture. It could be a realization that you've had. It could be starting with an A-level example that moves on from there. So there's no prescription here on what that might be, but please allow particularly your introduction, to express your individuality to some extent. Great. And the third tip here in taking your personal statement from a good statement to one that's really great is to go deep, not wide. Most students, when they're writing, try to fit too much in. That's probably because you've done lots of different things relating to your course. Let's say 25 different books. But from my experience, try to whittle down the major topics or themes or debates or areas of research that you're talking to between 3 to 5 ideas. That doesn't mean you can't suggest or mention additional ideas or readings in passing, but it does mean that I think you can only really go into depth within 4,000 characters to between sort of 3 to 5 main ideas. How do you do these things? And so how do you research these topics? Show that you can follow the debates like an undergraduate. That means finding resources which link to the debate you're interested in, and also thinking like an undergraduate. Do I agree with this person? What are they contributing to the debate? Why is this person's account more convincing? What gap does it fill? And so on and so forth. So an example of this. Here's a good version. Biology appeals to me across many fronts. I've read about CRISPR and the ethics of germline editing, Doudna and Charpentier's work, the Hayflick limit and telomerase and aging, Nessicari on epigenetics, Margulis's endosymbiotic theory, the gut microbiome, and Krebs' citric acid cycle. I've also attended a webinar on stem cell therapies and completed an online immunology course. Each has broadened my understanding and strengthened my wish to study biology. So this is an extreme example. This is something that I've made up. But there are similar personal statements from very talented students I see where they've tried to fit in many different things, many different topics within a short piece of text. Much better to go more into depth into a debate or fewer ideas. Mitochondria retain a few of their own genes despite most having migrated to the nucleus, and I wanted to know why. Allen's core hypothesis that genes respond to the membrane's redox state persuaded me because it predicts which genes are kept, but von Heijner's view that the proteins are too hydrophobic to reimport predicts a similar pattern, so I wasn't convinced the evidence supported them. Further reading suggested neither tells the whole story. I later presented this at Biology Society. Again, with the great version, if I was an interviewer at an Cambridge or Oxford college or an Imperial, which interview for a large number of their courses, this great version would be much better because it shows that you can think like an undergraduate, you can go into detail into a problem or a debate, as you would need to do in the course of your studies. And it's also something I want to talk to you about because it's showing me that you're actually interested in this. So it builds around one idea, maybe two ideas, not 9 or 10 different ideas. It's weighing up different explanations, so it's showing critical thinking. And it also shows academic maturity by saying that there are limits to these different explanations and that there's more that we need to do. So to summarize with great statements before we go on to the final section for an extra 5 or 10 minutes, I want to cover a few more things. Show your thinking. Please show some elements of your critical thinking. Secondly, maximize your individuality. Out of all the examples you could share, which do you think are going to help you to maximize your individuality? And thirdly, go deep, not wide. So pick a few different topics to go into in more depth, rather than try and fit in all the different topics that you've got. Just a quick note on maximizing individuality. What I'm not saying here is that you need, for the sake of it, to pick very niche topics in the subject that you're applying to and only talk about those for the sake of your personal statement. What I am saying is, if you're genuinely interested in something that's a little bit off the beaten track, then by all means follow that and express it in your application. Just because universities share a list of reading does not mean that that's the reading they want to see in your personal statement. So a few little complexities and questions to go through. If you're applying for multiple courses, most of you are, of course, applying for multiple courses, but this refers to multiple different courses with different course titles. Look at the course content closely. So examine the degree contents. So look at what modules there are, what options there are, and find the common language between them. So this might be, for example, if you're applying for PPE at Politics, Philosophy and Economics at one university, and then maybe just Politics and Philosophy at another university. You would not want to have separate paragraphs on Politics, Philosophy and Economics, because the course in Politics and Philosophy would know that you're applying for PPE elsewhere and probably not think that this is the right course for you. So instead, look for thematic approaches, which might be able to discuss elements of all those disciplines, but in a way that isn't going to turn off those other courses. If the course titles are the same, they might still be meaningfully different. So the example that I sometimes share is history. History sounds like it might be the same at most universities, and indeed the A-level syllabus is really similar. Most people study World War II, maybe the French Revolution or Russian Revolution, maybe the Cold War. There's a few big topics that most people have studied. However, history at degree level can mask a huge variety of different options. So the LSE, if you study history, this course is essentially an international history course with a social science edge to it, where you study history from roughly 1800s onwards, because that's what the faculty teaches. Whereas history at Oxford, there are lots of different history courses at Oxford. The history course at Oxford, there are some bounded restrictions in the first year. There are a couple of obligatory modules. There are a couple of options that you have, but you would be able to study a wider range of history. So including medieval history, Tudor history, that might not be readily available to you in LSE. And regardless of the courses that you're choosing, this is true. So please do your due diligence and look at the course content before you decide on which topics you'll be talking about. Non-academic content. So this is stuff that you might be doing in school or out of school that's non-academically relevant. Maybe music, maybe acting, maybe sport, and so on and so forth. Where does that go? So starting with work experience. Lots of people think work experience is hugely important for their university applications, and it really is only important for those courses which ask for it, particularly clinically leaning courses, medicine, potentially veterinary medicine, although the Cambridge course doesn't strictly require work experience in the same way that the RVC does, for example. But no other courses require work experience or volunteering experience to that same extent. So if you do have something which might be relevant or semi-relevant, absolutely include it. But my advice is to keep it brief and link it to the academic side again. So for example, if you have a law work experience in a solicitor's office or in a mini pupillage and you're applying for law, then it's absolutely fair to talk about that experience, but talk about it in a way that shows you're interested in the underlying concepts and principles and the law that you're looking at. Extracurriculars, so things like sports and drama, music, those kinds of things, clubs, do include them, but keep to your best. So I usually say keep to a couple sentences. And if you're in doubt over what to include, pick the ones that you're most passionate about and which help to maximize your individuality. For more performance-based or artistic courses, so things like fine art or music, then the practical side of things, so your extracurricular, may be more relevant. So if you're applying for music, it would be relevant to talk about your performance of music or your composition experience, for example. And also there are probably additional requirements like and portfolios. If you don't have space for this stuff, that is fine. You do not need to include it. But some universities do care to an extent about your extracurriculars. So it's worth, if there are some things you desperately want to include, offering those to your school referee to include them instead. Remember that your school has as much space to talk about you as you have to talk about yourself. It's 4,000 characters for them too. Where to put this stuff? So where to place this stuff, generally speaking, in section 3. Try, if you do include your extracurriculars in section 3 or some work experience, to end your personal statement back on your academic motivation to study your subject. So that might be bringing the reader back to the main core of your interest in the subject that you introduced in your first paragraph. Or it might be reinstating your motivation in a slightly different way, maybe in a more applied sense. But please try to avoid ending your personal statement on a totally irrelevant extracurricular. Again, it's not a massive problem. It does happen quite a lot, but it can make the reader forget some of the really great material that you shared before. Using AI. So some schools have their own policies about this. Generally speaking, universities ask students and candidates to be careful with their use of AI. They've mostly signed the Russell Group statement on the use of AI in higher education, which does not restrict the use of AI. It doesn't say we don't want you to use it at all, but it says these are the better ways to use it. And if you copy and paste AI material, that is academic misconduct and plagiarism. So, what sort of ways could you use AI in writing your personal statement? One way is to find interesting creative themes between the supercurriculars that you've got. So, for example, you might make a big list or brainstorm of all the different articles and interests and lectures and books that you've looked at in relation to your subject, and you put them into some kind of AI and ask what kinds of academic threads can you see between these different things. Of course, you should have your own opinions about these things, and then it's up to you to adjudicate whether what AI is then saying rings true for you, which ones you agree with, which ones you disagree with. So that's one possible use. Potentially to find readings. So AI has gotten a lot better at being able to identify what research is happening in a given area. You can also do this through Google Scholar, through PubMed, for example, through JSTOR, through asking people who know the research or the readings. Those places are also brilliant. But if you don't have those, this is an easy way of finding readings which might be academically interesting, or which are really important in the area. You could use it to stress test. So once you've submitted your statement, you might feed your statement into an AI model and ask it to pretend to be an Oxbridge interviewer, come up with a list of possible questions they might ask you. Not every AI model is going to be great for this, and I would be wary of it. It might be worth looking at some of the mock interviews on the Cambridge and Oxford websites and also on their YouTube channels, just to make sure that the kinds of questions it's producing look reasonable. But they can be useful. Also, cutting. Again, you have to use your own judgment on this, and it is actually relatively easy once you distance yourself from your statement a little bit to be able to cut aspects. But it can be useful in making suggestions as to which bits are weakest, which bits are repetitive, which bits are extraneous, which bits are, not adding anything or not progressing your point, or how you can make your point more concise, just to give you a few ideas. Obviously, you should be cautious. So use your own judgment on which ideas are worth pursuing. Keep your own voice in this process. Do not copy and paste any material from any AI system. Also, if a tutor or an admissions tutor reading your statement suspects your content might be copy and pasted or generated by AI, it's going to jeopardize your whole application. So they may just cancel your application or put a big red mark on your application. So really be careful. I want to give a couple minutes just on the Cambridge personal statement, maybe just in 1 minute, my top tips for the statement. If you are a Cambridge applicant, you have the opportunity to write a 1,200 character personal statement, additional statement, which is inside an additional form that Cambridge asks you to fill out. The submission deadline for that is the 22nd of October. So you have really a window of about a week to fill out that my Cambridge application. So it's a good idea to have some ideas, at least in writing, before that window comes about. Should you use that? I'd suggest if the course you're applying to is a little bit different at Cambridge, like mine was, HSPS or Natural Sciences, Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic, but to be honest, a lot of courses are a bit unique at Cambridge. I would suggest absolutely you should use it because you'll be able to tell them how you are perfectly suited to the course. What do they not want to see? So what's in the don't box here? Don't repeat anything else from elsewhere in your application. This is not the place to copy and paste anything from your main statement into the Cambridge personal statement. They read both of those things. Also, don't talk generically about Cambridge. So a lot of people write their Cambridge personal statement and talk about how great supervisions might be or the facilities of the faculty or how highly ranked it is for the subject. That is true for all the other applicants going for this course. So don't talk generically because that's not going to sell you above other applicants. So do show your fit to the specific course you've applied to. That means referencing aspects of the course that genuinely appeal to you. Might be that there's a core module in the first year that you've seen that looks really exciting, or an interdisciplinary aspect to the course, which isn't really a feature of most of the courses in this subject area. And ideally also add some evidence to back that up. So there might be a supercurricular that backs up your point. So for HSPS, which is a mixture of politics, international relations, sociology, anthropology, one unique aspect of that is the combination of different disciplines that you study. So I talked a bit about the combination between politics and anthropology in that, and then how I'd looked at some political anthropology, showing that I was interested in the boundaries between those disciplines. Finally, how are these statements used in interviews? So all Oxbridge courses interview, but it's not only Oxbridge. Imperial College interview for a large number of their courses, all medical schools interview, and quite a few other courses interview as well, particularly clinical or vocational courses or artistic courses. Expect to be asked about it. Most interviewees are asked about it to some extent. It might take a whole interview. It might just be a one quick question. Usually it is just a 5-minute warm up to the interview where they ask you something about what you said in your statement. It might be an interest you've mentioned or an argument you've made. Revise your own claims. So go through your statement and put question marks next to everything that you've claimed or every judgment or every evaluation. Anticipate questions about that. They might challenge you on your thoughts. They might say, have you looked at this other way of thinking about this topic? Discuss it with someone. That might be someone applying for the same subject at your school, might be a teacher, might be a family member. Have someone who's able to test your ideas. And the final piece of advice is after you submit your personal statement for Oxbridge in particular, which is in mid-October or earlier if you apply early, then try to continue exploring the topics that you're discussing in your statement, because it's always really effective to be able to show that you have gone a bit further with exploring the topics that you mentioned. If you leave those interests frozen in time to early October, then they can seem a bit less authentic. So if you're really interested, you'd probably go on to research them a bit afterwards. Final thoughts. It does take a bit longer than you think. You might have already found that. But you have to know when to stop. As I mentioned, other things are more important, admissions tests and so on. Your schoolwork is really important. So there's only so much more you can improve your personal statement. And after you're happy with it, then leave it, maybe for a few days, return to it with fresh eyes, make any final tweaks. Make sure it sounds like you. You're listening to this because you want advice on your personal statement. Maybe you're a parent who wants advice on how to help your son or daughter, but it must sound like a single person, and it should sound like the applicant, particularly if they're going for an interview. It's really easy to tell from reading a document and then speaking to someone if there is a disjunct there, or if they've had lots of help with their statement and they haven't really owned the ideas that they're putting in there. And triple check, I said academics are pedantic. A typo is not a disaster, but it can slightly undercut your personal statement. So proofread many times. We have lots of personal statement examples on our website. If you log into our website or if you register, you'll be able to find those. But for now, I'll leave a QR code here for you to register. If you are leaving, then there's a quick Zoom survey. Please do fill that out. It's really helpful for us. If you want some more advice, then feel free to contact us on those contact details above. So there's a phone number. There's also an email you can contact about your own questions. But I will go through a couple questions here, and I'll prioritize the ones which are to do with undergraduate personal statements. So one person has asked, does it make it look less impressive if I read a book on the reading list? By itself, absolutely not. Like, it's a great thing. They put them on the reading list because those things are recommended as great ways to get into the subject and explore the subject. However, I'd suggest if you only stick to books that are meant as introductions to the subject, then they might question whether you know the level of the kind of content you'll be looking at once you start the course. So if you begin with a book which is very introductory to the subject, for my course, that might be something like Introduction to Political Philosophy by Woolf. Great book, and is actually quite complex in places, but I'd want to see that you've gone into a bit more depth into one or two areas. That's also because introductory books are by necessity very broad. And so if you're going to talk about a few topics in more depth, you will necessarily need to go a bit beyond them. Uh, great. My personal statement's very focused on one specific topic of my subject, but I know there is more to the subject than just that topic. Would that disadvantage me? You can't hope to cover all aspects of the subject that you're applying to. So you need to make some choices about which topics you're going to be including. However, if you only focus on one very niche topic for the majority of your personal statement, I'd say it might be a little bit too narrow in focus because in your undergraduate degree, particularly in the first year, you'll have to cover a wide range of the subject. And so they need to be convinced that it's the right course for you. So I try to give it a little bit more balance than only focusing on one specific thing. An example might be for law, you have to study 7 compulsory modules in order for that law degree to be qualifying. Similar system for psychology degrees. So if you only talk about international human rights law, which is usually a third year or even a postgrad topic, and it's not one of the 7 key topics for the entirety of your application, it begins to look more like a postgrad application. So I'd have someone else read it, just a sense check. You can feel free to contact us if you want, but it's probably a good idea to bring some more balance to it. Okay. I've got a question about a PhD. So with PhDs, the person who's asked that, I think there's a lot of detail we can go into. I'm very happy to, but please contact us separately using the information on the screen. Send us over an email. We can set up a Zoom call with you or a phone call with you and go a little bit more into detail about your PhD applications. There's a question. I'm applying for the CS and philosophy course offered in Oxford and UCL, and just CS and other 3 universities. How much should I dedicate my personal statement to for each of these 2 subjects? So that's a really good question. And it sort of depends how you deal with the topics. You can talk about computer science in quite a philosophical way. And actually, lots of philosophy is very logic based. So there's a big overlap between computer science and philosophy in that sense. So I would see if you can find an interdisciplinary topic so you can talk about both of those things for at least one of your interests. It could be logic, for example. Algorithms, probably not so much. But if it's something like conditional logic or Boolean logic, then that could work. But because your other 3 applications are computer science focused, then make it computer science heavy. So I'd say lead with computer science and integrate some philosophical interests in one of the topic paragraphs and potentially also in some of your wider extracurricular reading as well. So there's a question. Let's say if you've only read an introductory book, then rather than moving forwards towards another book, you found your own point of reflection and moving into internship, then read specific cases to help enforce the theory or idea. So I think this question is asking if they've read an introductory book on a reading list, and instead of going on by looking at further research in the area, they've reflected on that idea and looked at practical implications. I think that can also work well because you can make a point about how a specific idea that's expressed in an introductory book might show itself up in practical circumstances, but it really depends on the type of idea you're talking about, the type of insight that you're offering. And it's usually slightly better to show that you've looked a little bit further at the academic content past an introductory book. Because most often, unless it's a very vocational subject that you've genuinely had some experience in, um, you wouldn't have been able to take the academic idea much further in your internship. Nice. Okay. So, I have another question. Is mentioning an EPQ an academic or extracurricular topic? Really good question. Something I get asked quite a lot. So, an EPQ is a super curricular activity in the sense that you get to choose what you're studying. So, it's off syllabus because no one is dictating to you the content that you need to read. Um, to some extent, it is facilitated by school. You usually have some kind of mentor or someone helping you with your research at school, and you get some UCAS points from it. So you get a full qualification from doing it. So I think it's really good to do. My advice with EPQs for very competitive universities is to try and show how you've gone a little bit beyond the usual requirements. So my guess is that you're academically doing well at school. You're likely to be interested in the topic that you're applying to study, and you're likely to be doing something in your EPQ which is hopefully related to the subject that you're applying to. If it is, great. I would suggest talk about it in your personal statement, but also talk about how you've gone beyond the EPQ to research that topic a bit further. So maybe it was during your EPQ, you did a bit of original research for it. So you gathered some data for it. You had to design an experiment, for example, and analyze the results. Then maybe you took an interest in some other areas of research that linked to it after you submitted your EPQ. So EPQ is definitely academic. I'd say it's super curricular, but it's also facilitated by school. And so it's worth describing how you've gone above and beyond the normal expectations of an EPQ, ideally. So some of the questions I've got left, I think, are less focused on personal statements. Those kinds of questions, please get in touch to ask them. So there's two or three more that I'll do. Okay. So there's a couple more questions about joint degrees. I've got a question about history and economics and a question about maths and philosophy. It's a similar answer to the answer I gave previously about computer science and philosophy. It's a very similar subject in the case of maths and philosophy. So it depends on the specific courses that you're applying to, insofar as how much of that degree is going to be history, how much is going to be economics. Do you have 50-50 split, or could you do 80-20 history and economics? Could you specialize completely into economics, maybe with a little bit of history from your second year? How flexible is it? That will dictate a little bit how much balance you need to bring to bear. It's important if you're applying for a subject that's really competitive, like history and economics at Oxford. It has about 12 students studying that subject each year to show that you've got a strong passion for both of those subjects. So I would question why you're not applying for history and economics at other universities, to be honest. And if you did have a personal statement that was very economics heavy, then the history and economics department at Oxford would probably not think your interests are balanced enough to cope with both subjects, history and economics. And they'd think, why didn't you apply for economics or at Cambridge or economics and management here? So I would consider courses elsewhere that would allow you to study some history at least. Let's say Edinburgh would, or Glasgow or St Andrews. Durham has lots of good interdisciplinary courses. LSE has economics with economic history, which would be quite a nice combination for you. And there's lots of other history with economics courses, which would allow you to specialize in economics. So that would be my advice, is consider your course choices again. Okay. So I'm going to finish with one more question. For those of you whose question I haven't been able to answer, please do get in touch with us with those contact details. Be very happy to answer. This is about the difference between the Cambridge statement and the personal statement. So the personal statement is the statement that you write through UCAS, 4,000 characters, including spaces. That goes to all of the choices you make through UCAS. You have up to 5 choices you can make. So they go to all of those different courses. The Cambridge statement is submitted only to Cambridge in a form that Cambridge only asks you to fill out. And it's shorter, so it's 1,200 characters as opposed to 4,000. And it's your chance to show off how well suited you are to that particular degree you've chosen at Cambridge. It's not the chance again to copy paste any of your personal statement in there. It's an optional supplementary personal statement, but it's something I would encourage you to use if you have anything to say about your suitability for that course. Great. I'm going to have to wrap it up there and let you get on with your evenings and your weeks. But we're always here to help if you need any more advice on anything to do with grades or applying or admissions tests or statements. Thank you very much for listening. I hope some of that's been helpful. We'll send out the recording um, and also a discount from some services that we can offer for personal statements. But apart from that, have a great rest of your evening and thank you for being here.